3.
Good evening. Welcome to SlushHeap. Season 4, that's all I'm going to tell you. I lost count of what show it was. I do know tonight we're going to tackle the beta problem. The beta readers, the peer review, and all that kind of stuff. Again, we should be learning something. I know I'm anxious to learn, so I didn't do much homework tonight because I don't know much about what a beta reader really is. I know what beta means, but they're going to explain to me what beta reader means. So we have, again, a fantastic couple of guests with us. Repeats, which is really good usually, because they know what they skipped last time, and maybe they'll bring it in there this time and enlighten us. So without further ado, Darcie, the bus stop for you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to SlushHeap. We're, again, Season 4, Episode 3. And we're talking about peer review and beta readers in our next step of our series on how to write a book. So if you missed the first 2 episodes, the first episode was on outlining. We had 2 wonderful guests, Raymond Benson and Laurel Snyder, on for that episode. And then last week we spoke about writing a first draft with Joe Marshall, Win, and oh no, and I can't remember. That's horrible. I'm really sorry. But anyway, yes, we had a wonderful guest last week, and we talked about writing the first draft, which is a very, very important step. And then, of course, once that draft is done and you've cleaned it up, now you need to give it to someone and get an opinion. So with that said, we have brought in 2 really experienced and informative people who have been on the show before, as Rudi mentioned. Kate Tilton is an author assistant. She's been with us before, and she handles a lot of the street teams and beta readers and a lot of the things that go into making a book great. Kate, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
And sitting beside her, actually, is someone that she's worked firsthand with and continues to do so presently. So Rachel Thompson, I am sure many, many people know, probably anyone watching the show knows, because she's all over the internet. And if you haven't read her blogs yet, you definitely should. Check her out. You're on Goodreads, Twitter, Google+. I've seen you everywhere, I think. So,
I think I am.
So Rachel, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And as always, Rudi, I like to, put you on the spot.
Sure.
And I'm going to do that again this evening.
Okay. But you know what? My first question is really off topic because I really want to know. Rachel, you just mentioned about, we mentioned all the things you do. Mm-hmm. And how do you do it? How do you have enough time? Do you actually make yourself a schedule and you stick by it?
Kinda.
There you go.
I do a lot of things. Kate actually keeps a Google Calendar for me, so I know what's coming up. She also has started loading blog posts for me that either I've written or I have guests write, and so that's cleared out a lot of my schedule, so I can focus on writing. And then I also have my business, which is Bad Redhead Media, and I have a number of clients that I do social media for them or I train them. So, that kind of stuff takes precedence over really anything else, is, making sure the clients are happy. But I still have to work in writing. I write now for Huffington Post, actually, for their book section. I have bookpromotion.com, which is it's a great site, totally free, and I load, after I'm done here, I'll be writing my article for them for tomorrow. I have my own 2 blogs, and then there's a couple others that I also write for. One is a monthly publication called Self-Publishers Monthly, and so I have a deadline for that. So, usually I'm up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It's quiet. Everybody's asleep. I just put in my iTunes and right away. I don't sleep as much as I'd like, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm still drinking coffee. So that basically gives you a little bit of a hint on how I do things. And I'm a mom. Okay. I have 2 kids, so keeps me busy.
All that in one day.
Yeah,
pretty much.
So Rachel, it's important to ask as we're talking to new authors, is this what people can expect if they're going to go into writing and they're going to publish something? Can they expect that kind of schedule?
Well, not really, because my business is also social media, and I am paid for some of the articles that I write. So, part of my whole writing gig and persona spreads across to that. So if all you're writing is books, then no, because mostly I'm on social media as much as I am because I'm monitoring. I manage 50-something different channels for people across maybe 10 clients. So that's the reason I'm kind of out there. But I did make a very concerted effort to, when I started my business, to start writing articles for various sites. And some people just don't want to do that or don't have to do that. So no, it doesn't have to be this insane. In other words, yeah. That's just me.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I wish that maybe I had the staying power to do that.
Thank you. Energy. Yeah, exactly.
I'm tired. I'm tired a lot. Coffee helps.
Okay, so we have our first draft. Now let's go into Kate. I'm going to start with you, if that's your end of it. After the first draft, I understand that what the peer review is. You're going to give it to somebody within your genre that you wrote, and they're going to basically read it and come back and give you all the bad news. That's the peer review, right?
Well, it doesn't always have to be an author of the same genre.
Oh, it doesn't? Okay.
No, it doesn't. I mean, that can help, but sometimes it's good to get other opinions. So what you're talking about is, like getting a critique partner. And that is someone who is an author, and he's going to give you a different perspective on your writing because they know, what works, what doesn't. So,
but if I write and everything is based on chemistry, wouldn't I want somebody that knew a little bit about chemistry?
Yeah, usually when people do, critique partners, I've seen a lot of people, they have multiple critique partners. So I've seen people that do it in groups. Okay. So everyone kind of has different areas of expertise. If you're going into something that's, super, educational, then you probably would talk to someone, even a professor in that field or something like that. But for most, fiction writers, you don't necessarily need to have someone that's in that genre to be able to give you advice, because that critique partner is there not necessarily just for the genre, but they're there to really pull apart that writing. So they need to be a writer. That's really the critique partner.
So if we're looking at the two titles, peer review and beta readers, tell me, what's the difference between it? So
for me, a beta reader is a reader. So it could be an author, but generally it's not. Your beta reader is reading the novel for things like plot holes. Are the characters, do they make sense? Do they like them? So the beta reader is looking more at the overall story, whereas a critique partner is looking at the writing. Does this sentence make sense? Is, the book laid out as it should be, beginning, middle, end, that kind of a thing. So they do have different things they look at.
So you should probably aim to have both then?
Oh, definitely, yeah. You need both.
Okay. And actually,
and both should not be the same person then.
No, yeah, and you definitely want to have more eyes on your book. You don't want too many. There is such a thing as having too many people look at your book before. But just like when you go through multiple edits with an editor, you want more people. So you want to have a critique partner too that are going to look at it for the actual writing. You're going to want a beta reader who's going to look for that story, and then you're going to go through the edit rounds.
Okay. Excellent. So, I'm sorry. Rachel.
Yes.
I'm getting all choked up over here. When we were talking right before the show, and so I'm going to sort of introduce it again for those who weren't in on that conversation, but you have teamed with BookTrope or signed on with BookTrope to publish your books now, and I think it's wonderful, and I'll have you tell a little bit about that, but also they sort of take care of part of that process for you, don't they? They recruit sort of your beta readers, or they give you a list of potential readers?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when I created the print version of Broken Pieces was when that's what I was intending to do and was sort of shopping around, and I ended up signing with them. So at that point, the beta reading process was already done because my book was already out in ebook format. But yes, you can submit your book to an internal beta process. The way that I've always done it in the past, and it may be a little different, I think, than what you were saying, Kate, but that's what I sort of love about this whole creative process is we do things as we feel, you know, they're ready to do it. The way that I've always done it in my 3 books on my own is I would write it, I hired a professional editor, she went through it, I call it my word vomit, she goes through it and creates a structure, and we go back and forth and do the rewrites or whatever, and at the point where it's not perfect, but it's in good enough shape is when then I start asking people, not other writers, unless they're already fans, right? But you prefer to have people who, you know, I'll just put it out on Twitter or Facebook, and I'll say, does anyone want to be a beta reader? At this point now I have a street team, so you know, these are like super fans basically, so they're going to want to get their hands on it first. So those are the people I'll go to for beta reading. And it really is, you know, beta means test. It's sort of a test run. What works, what doesn't. I don't really need them to help with things like editing or grammar or spelling because I hire an editor and a proofreader. And I recommend that everybody do that if you can. Just because your book won't sell if it's filled with errors. So nobody should ever see that book if it's been through your editor, your critique partners, your proofreader, all of your beta readers. That book should be pretty darn perfect by the time you upload that to Amazon.
That's a good point, and the fact that there are multiple levels of people. So when it comes time for the beta readers, this is something that they're just doing for you at no expense, right?
Right. No, they're not paid in any way. Basically, they're avid readers who love your work usually, or are experienced beta readers who just like to see books before they're published. There's sort of a excitement involved in being kind of in the know and, oh, okay, I get to read Rachel Thompson's book. It's not even out yet, but it's great, or I hate it, or whatever, you know. But there are people who are just excited to be a part of that process, that creative process, and that's the way that they contribute. So that you don't pay them. The only thing they get is a free copy of the book. And what's nice about it is, from a marketing perspective, is then you can send them or gift them the final approved copy that you've uploaded, and you have people who are pretty much ready to write a review. Now, there's no promise that the review will be great, but at least they've had a sneak peek, and it's almost a way to market your work without marketing it yet, if that makes sense. It's like pre-marketing, basically.
Exactly, yeah. Do you screen your beta readers?
Yes, I do. I pretty much will ask, in the past what I've done, like I said, is I just put it out on Twitter and said, does anyone want to beta read for my new book when I was ready, about a month before. So I wasn't even really at the point yet where I was ready for people to read it, but I started collecting email addresses. And some people, you really get an idea of how committed people are, because they'll say, yes, I'd love to read your book. You say, great, DM me your email address, and you never hear from them again. So that's almost your first screening. And then your second screening, right, is that you'll collect all those addresses, and I send them just a little, hey, my book's going to be out in a week kind of thing. Are you still interested in beta reading? And if you don't hear back, then you take them off the list. And then you kind of go from there. I don't like to have a huge amount of beta readers, but I think it depends on your material. For example, for Man Code Exposed, I wanted a lot of men to read that book because I wanted to get the male perspective, because I'm a female writing about female perspective of relationships. And they pretty much loved it. I got a couple of guys who said, this might not sit right, or that might not sit right, or, you know, have you thought about this? So that was helpful to get the guy's view. But I specifically went and, you know, got maybe 20 beta readers, half women, half men. And that was a concerted effort to get that, you know, figured out that way.
Okay. Well, here's a follow-up
Rachel.
question, actually, that's coming from a audience member.
Okay.
Sure.
His name's John, and he's asking, do you give your beta readers any guidelines as to what to look for?
You know, some people do. I let them know that I am working with a professional editor who's edited all my books, actually. So I don't really typically need them to look at the structure, but I do like to get feedback on it. For example, on Broken Pieces, we went with more of a looser structure because it's called Broken Pieces. So I wanted people to feel a little uncomfortable with, it's not all chronological, it's essays and poetry, it's not all essays and then all poetry. And so a few people got back to me and said, it made me very uncomfortable, but I get that that's what you were going for because I talk about some very serious topics in there. Other people, you know, I basically just said, tell me your overall feel, if something confused you, if something was redundant, but I don't really ask them for anything specific. I just, you know, I just like to get their general feedback. And some will get back to you in a few hours, and some take weeks.
That was another thing I was going to ask. So actually, let me first though, let's throw this to Kate. Kate, how about you? Because you as an assistant, you're helping authors secure beta readers, right?
I haven't actually gotten anyone beta readers before. I do want to make a point. Personally, I feel there's a difference between a beta reader and an advanced reader. So, you know, when I work with an author as a beta reader for the author, the book usually has not been through an editor. It's probably not the first draft, but it's probably only a couple of drafts, you know, from that first draft. So it's pretty rough, you know. I might pull out some spelling errors and things like that, but I'm really there to give them, like, overall, if there's a plot hole, you know, or just something that really doesn't make sense, it's at that stage where the author still has time to kind of fix that before it goes and gets, you know, rounds of editing. And then as an advanced reader, that's usually the book is pretty much almost ready to be published. It might go through another round of, you know, like proofreading for any last spelling errors and things, but it's pretty much already there. And those advanced readers are really the ones that you want to review the book. You give them that early copy. You know, like in traditional publishing, when people get an ARC, the book is pretty much already done. It's been through editing. It's just, you know, the last like line edits that needs to go through. So I think that's a big difference.
Okay, so would your guidelines be different from one to the other?
Yeah, because as an advanced reader, you know, you're really just looking if you enjoy the book. Like if you were reading a regular book and reviewing it, it's very similar. As a beta reader, you know, if I have a manuscript that I'm beta reading for, I know it's not, you know, going to be published the way it is given to me. So I'm really looking for, you know, plot holes, if there's a character that doesn't make sense, a scene that doesn't make sense. And I've had that happen before. I read a book and I was like, I don't understand why this whole like section's in here, or, you know, I don't even know who this character is. It wasn't explained to me. And the author still has time to go back, add in the text, or take out the text that doesn't make sense before it goes to editing and before it goes to the advanced readers, who are really going to be the ones that actually review the book.
Okay, excellent. So coming back then to what Rachel was saying, when you're, well, actually two things. I'm going to touch on an earlier thing first, and then we'll come back to the other. But you had mentioned earlier that you only have a few. You don't like to have too many beta readers. So what would you recommend to a new author who's kind of doing this for the first time as far as number?
It's very personal preference. So, you know, if you are treating a beta reader like, you know, someone that you're really looking for things to fix, you know, you don't want to have 50 people reading your book and telling you these are all the plot holes I see or something. It's too much, too overwhelming. Whereas you could have 50 advanced readers, and that would be great, because they'll pretty much maybe tell you there's a typo there or something, but overall they're just going to tell you what they feel about the book, and they're going to write a review about it. So, you know, beta readers, it really depends. I mean, I haven't written a book, so I haven't worked on the opposite end of that. But I know, you know, I've met authors who, you know, they only have a handful of beta readers. Some have more, some have less. And it really depends on how much feedback you want to get on that manuscript, like how much you can sift through and deal with, too.
Okay. How about you, Rachel? What would you recommend?
Well, I think we see things a little bit differently, but that's okay because I still love Kate. She's fabulous. But
I was getting worried.
No, great. I'd be lost without her. Anyone just tuning in, Kate's my virtual assistant. Although she's a real person. She's not a virtual person, she's a real person. But I generally keep it, I have a few writer friends that I share my work with as I'm writing it. And then once it's gone through all the edits and before it goes to proofing and formatting is when I send it out to, I guess, what you would consider, Kate, to be advanced readers, whereas I really see them as beta readers. So I guess it's 6 of one, one half dozen of the other. I think the most important thing is that any writer understands that people need to see your work. A lot of authors are very afraid. They want to keep it close to the vest. They don't want anyone to see their work. And they have to remember that they're releasing these books into the world, and they're going to start getting reviews. And if you want your book to be as great and wonderful as it possibly can be before anyone ever sees it, and this is part of that process to get it to, spectacular, so that you don't end up getting reviews like the formatting was weird, or, they used the wrong spelling of discreet or something, and those things should all be caught before it ever sees the light of day. So I think that you do have to show your work to people, whether it's earlier in the process or later in the process. It's an individual choice. It's really up to the author and what their comfort level is, I think.
John is actually asking another question. He asked, now that you have a street team and that's leading to your beta readers, do you feel that you're getting better beta readers now than you were when you were just finding them on Twitter?
I think it's a process as you go through. Like my first book, the beta readers were just whoever seemed interested, right? But I think you have to be specific. I told them I'm writing nonfiction and I'm writing humor for my first 2 books. The second book was, like I said, more fine-tuned. I wanted more men as opposed to women because it was about relationships. The third book touches on things like grief, sexual abuse, suicide of an ex, very serious topics. And honestly, at that point, I just knew that I had fans already who were, chomping at the bit to find out when my next book would be out. And so I wasn't as specific in my selection of them if they were willing to read. Now that I have the street team, I'll certainly utilize them, and I'm already sharing things. They've seen quite a number of things that nobody else has seen yet for Broken Places. And pretty soon I'll be sharing even more, so they'll get a little taste of it. But I definitely would love to get their feedback. But I'll still put messages out to people, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or even Google Plus at this point. One of the things that's helped me so much in marketing my work is Pinterest. And that's completely different from last time. I didn't really even have a Pinterest board. Now my Pinterest poetry board's got 2,700 followers. It's insane. God. I mean, I can't even believe it. I looked at that the other day is that real? That many people are following my board? It's crazy, but it's getting a lot of pre-marketing that way. And so a number of people have contacted me saying, hey, when the book's out, can I take a look at it? And those will probably be people that I'll connect with to beta read for me.
Okay.
One of the things that's really nice tonight is the fact that the audience questionnaire is working for once, because John has another question for you, and it makes my work at least a lot easier because we're getting some good questions in here. And he's asking this time, do you encourage your beta readers to post reviews to any places other than Amazon or Goodreads?
Well, Barnes & Noble certainly is very helpful. I think that for a lot of authors, for example, my paperback version of Broken Pieces is available pretty much everywhere. So whether it's Amazon, which is, of course, online only, but the print is available. Barnes & Noble is important. A friend of mine who wrote the foreword, actually, was in a Barnes & Noble in, I think, Maryland. And he told me that he was there for a signing of someone else's book, and someone walked up to him with my book, and they introduced him. His name's Bennett Pomerantz, and he said, and he's a reviewer, and they said, "Is this you?" And they were pointing at my book, and I'm like, "Wow, I'm actually on a shelf in Barnes & Noble," and they asked him to sign my book because his name's on the cover. So I mean, I think it's important for people who want to support you, and that's something as an author that you can do. Have them sign up for your newsletter. And as you send out your ARCs or your beta copies, you can say, the book's going to go live in 1 week. I'll send you a reminder. Will you please post your review to Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, or wherever else you may be? I know in like Canada, Kobo is really big. So, yeah.
Right.
And personally, I think it depends on what stage. If I am beta reading a book and it's really rough and it's going to go through a lot of changes, then I'm not going to want to write a review on what I read. I'm going to want to go and read the finalized copy before I write a review.
Definitely.
I've seen that where I've read a manuscript and they had a nickname for one of these characters, and the nickname completely changed from the manuscript I read to the final version.
Yeah.
So that's important. If I'm an advanced reader, like if I have a advanced reader's copy of the book, then I'm okay with reviewing it as it stands like that. I put it in my review that it's an advanced reader's copy, but at that point, really not a lot's going to change. Probably some spelling and things, but those are things that as a reader I know it's an advanced reader's copy. It hasn't been through that. So I wouldn't say in my review, well, this had these spelling errors, because that's going to be taken care of by the time people actually get the finalized version. So it really depends on where the manuscript is when I'm given it. And
so
then where
Kate, when you post a review, do you post to one site specifically, or will you take that same review and post it in multiple places?
I will take one review and post it in multiple places.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't really take review requests anymore, but when I did, I'd post to my blog and I'd recopy to Goodreads. And then if the author asked me, I would repost to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere that I had an account.
Okay.
So every reviewer is different. Check the review policies. Check the review policies. Do not go and ask someone to review your book without checking to make sure they have a review policy and they actually accept books.
Yeah, it's really important.
Well, Kate, do you use Pinterest at all? That was mentioned earlier.
Yes, I love Pinterest.
You do? Okay.
I do. So, Pinterest is fabulous.
So this next question then that came to us from Catherine, which is, boy, I don't want to use the word old friend of ours, because she certainly is not old, but she's been a long-time friend of ours. And she asked a question, and I would go to both of you. Kate, if you want to take it first, that's fine. Pinterest is very visual. How do you set up your Pinterest board to draw others to your writing?
Oh, to your writing. That's interesting. I mean, I'm not a writer, but I do have a blog. So I find it is important to make sure, as an author, that you have a blog and that you have a board on Pinterest for your blog posts. So on that aspect, whenever you write a blog post, you should have a pinnable image. So I actually tend to make images with PicMonkey that have the title of the blog post, so that when someone pins that image, they kind of know what the article is going to be about just from the image. So that's an important way to get traffic to your website. There are a million different Pinterest tips that you can use. One of the best that was given to me is your first board should be your most important. And if you really are looking to build followers, you should try to do things that are seasonal. So we just had Cinco de Mayo. So if you created a Cinco de Mayo board, a month before or 2 weeks before the actual holiday, and did Cinco de Mayo recipes, when people are searching for that because it is an upcoming topic, they're going to be led to your page and they'll follow. And that has worked tremendously for me. So right now I have spring recipes as my first board, but I have an excellent publishing article board. I have on the blog board. I have a board for my Kate chat, and you kind of go through, and you really got to think about who your audience is. I think that was the biggest thing that I found out with Pinterest was, when I had just an account for me, people weren't following because it wasn't geared towards them. If you make an account and you want people to follow you, you need to make it about them and what they're interested in versus, what you're looking for. So,
good point.
So Rachel, how's your thinking different? Since Kate did say she's not an author per se, you are an author. How do you look at that question?
Well, I decided because my book is both nonfiction, essays, and poetry, the way that I'm advertising it on Google AdWords and the way that I'm putting it in tweets and shares, etc., is I always have the hashtag poetry. So, and it's actually #1 right now on women's poetry on Amazon, the ebook version. And so what I did is I created a poetry board, and it just says poetry, mine, and others. So it's not all about me. It's not, only, I'm not into the hard sell. I'm much more into building relationships and using social media to do that. And so I put up poetry that resonates with me, and I share much of that out on Twitter and Facebook and on Google+. And then the link goes back to my poetry board. So then people, generally, if they're on Pinterest looking for poetry, I'll come up. Or if they're looking somewhere else, it'll link back to that. And so it's just an easy way to get people to find some of my favorite poets as well as some of the visual quotes. This is something I learned how to do in the last probably 6 months, is go to sites like Pinstomatic or Quozio, which is like a quotes kind of place. And you can take a quote, make a visual out of it, and then post it on your poetry board. Or let's say you write paranormal YA fiction, make a paranormal YA fiction board, and you can start doing those sorts of visual quotes. It takes seconds. It's very easy. And I even wrote an article about it. Kate, was that on Rachel or Bad Redhead? I can't remember.
Pretty sure it was on Bad Redhead Media.
Yeah. I think it was, because I think I read it there. It wasn't that long ago, right?
No, I'm probably within the last 2 months. But it's it's very easy, and that, I think, more than anything, that's my most popular board. And I have a Nutella board. Everybody knows me as the Nutella chick. They see a Nutella story, they send it to me, and that's great. It doesn't really have anything to do with my writing, but at least they're thinking Rachel, and they'll share things with me. But I also have like a purple board because that's my favorite color, or books. Kate and I have a shared book board that we're part of, and then I started Monday Blogs, which was, it's been around for about 1.5 years now. There's a Monday Blogs board, so anybody who's on Pinterest and wants to share a post on Monday Blogs can either follow the board, or I'll invite them to join and post. So it's a wonderful way. Group boards are a great way to get people to look at your own stuff. But again, I think you can't go into it being pushy or being, it's all about me. It has to be about building that relationship.
Yeah. So I agree with Rachel. I have a group board called Authors and Readers. So I share, some of my blog posts on there. I've invited people, and they share, funny pictures, things about their books, and it's a great way to build a community. Another good Pinterest tip is to not make your titles confusing. They should be very clear and straightforward, and not cutesy, because it's all about being able to find them in search. So having Rachel's board where it's poetry, when someone looks at poetry, Rachel's board can show up. If she said something like my work or whatever, no one searches that. It's not the best title for you. And that's something that you always have to look at and kind of figure out what is an actual searchable term that describes the board and isn't too dull.
Okay. So it's kind of coming back to the whole idea of having keywords. You sort of have to know the keywords that you're going to use.
Yeah. Yeah, keywords are the foundation really for anything you do across the board. Like I was saying, poetry, I'm using that in advertising, tweets, Pinterest board, everything. Not every tweet, not every share, but when I do, it's on there.
Excellent. So we actually have another question or comment, maybe. There are many blogs that allow books being released to be posted. What is your feeling about the value of blogs for promoting books? Is it worth the author's time to join the blog and post their books?
Do you want me to take this one, Kate?
I mean, I think it depends on the actual site you're using. You know, if people are actually on that site looking for new releases, then yes, that's great, go for it. If it's a site that just posts promo and no one actually engages with it, then probably not.
Yeah.
It's a matter when it comes into advertising. You know, if it's, I mean, me and Rich talk about this too. We'd rather focus on building up relationships. And actually, recently I've been listening to a podcast called New Rainmaker, and it talks a lot about, instead of these ads, for example, Marvel was really in the hole. They were about to go out of business. So they partnered with, you know, these big Hollywood movie companies to make movies from their characters. And they got very little money from the actual blockbuster movie, but it basically served as a 2-hour advertisement for their merchandise. But it was something that people were interested in, they engaged in. So I really find that instead of doing, you know, like promotional posts, I do a lot less of them on my website because people don't care as much. But if you can give an engaging story or something and tie the book into that, more people are going to engage and you're going to see better sales.
Excellent. Good point. Rachel, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think there's two ways you can go. I think book bloggers are extremely influential, but you can't just, you know, I get a lot of random requests, will you read my book? And I'm not a book reviewer, I'm not a book blogger. So I think that people really need to look closely at who they're approaching. Just like anything else, you know, you wouldn't go to a neurologist for your gastroenteritis, So, I mean, you have to be really specific. And there's a great list out there called bookbloggerlist.com. And it's worth approaching those authors. It's broken down by, those bloggers by genre. So if I want nonfiction bloggers only, then that's really the only people I'm going to talk to. And they're all listed by whether they want a paperback version or they want a Mobi format, or if they're willing to, feature you on their blog as opposed to just writing a review for you. Bloggers generally need books to feature, whether it's an excerpt or a review. They're avid readers. They're people who are dedicated to promoting authors, and typically there's no fee for that. The only time there's ever a fee is if you do something like a blog tour, and you're really just paying for the administrative costs of them putting you on a schedule, getting your information out to all the bloggers, getting you a date, and some promotion that they do for you. So I always tell people that blog tours are not, you're not purchasing fake reviews, you're not bribing anybody to write anything for you. There's never a guarantee that it's going to be positive, but I like that because at least from a visibility standpoint, your name and the book name is getting out there. And if you just look at Google and SEO and search and all those terms, even if you don't know that much about it, you will understand that if you're on 30 blogs, you may have no sales, but you'll have 30 listings on Google, and that's going to help when it comes to somebody typing in your keywords.
Excellent. So here's a question for you, coming back to the beta reader peer review topic. Should you ever consider book bloggers for advanced readers or beta readers, however you want to look at it?
I think Definitely. You can. Yeah, I think you can. Particularly, it's all a process. That's what I tell people. There's no, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So over the years, I've gotten to know some top Amazon reviewers. I've had them guest post for me. I've developed basically relationships with them, professional relationships. And so when I have a new book out, typically they're right there saying, hey, I want to see it before anybody else because we've developed this relationship. Does that mean they'll give me a 5-star glowing review? Absolutely not. So people just need to accept both sides of that coin. And I just see a lot of people saying, hey, can I can you download my book and give me a review? And I don't even know you, number one, and number two, I'm not even a book blogger, so why are you even asking me, or a reviewer? But I do think that if you can develop those relationships so that when you do release it, again, it's pre-marketing, right? It's pre-release marketing. Develop relationships with people as you're writing, and then when you get to that point of release, then you have those relationships and you can get those reviews.
Excellent. Kate, did you want to say anything more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, book bloggers do make good advanced readers. Traditional publishing, they send out advanced reader copies to big book bloggers. That's how that process really works. Because book bloggers are the ones that are writing reviews. That's what their blogs are usually based on, is book reviews. So that works really well. Beta readers, it depends. I think, my idea of a beta reader is, they get a more rough draft, so it's more personal. So, I beta read for authors who I have connections with, who I have relationships with, and I don't just beta read for anyone. So it has to be, either an author I work for or someone. I mean, I've had authors from Kate Chat who I know very well, and I've read for them. Whereas an advanced reader's copy, I might not know the author, but I might look at the book and say, this does sound interesting and I have the time, so I'll read it and post a review. So it really depends, I think, on your definition of beta reader and advanced reader and the stage, again, of the manuscript.
Rachel, can you give us that name again of the blog you were talking about, the book blog that you will use?
Yeah, I just wrote it down in chat also. It's bookbloggerlist.com. Pretty basic. Yeah.
Yeah, I also, if you are looking for book bloggers, on my website under the resources, I have a book blogger tab, and that has a bunch of links to different sites, like the book blogger list, where you can go find a bunch of bloggers by, what genre they read, if they read indie or not, and all of that. So that's a good resource for authors.
So, for our guests, in case you missed, again, the name, we will, since we now have the exact spelling and everything, we'll get that on our web pages so that they can look there also and find what they're looking for. And ladies, I got to say, since for the last 35 minutes you answered our questions, you gave us a lot of information. I don't know if you noticed or not, but my right hand snuck into the studio very quietly, and has been sitting there for some 35 minutes. He is alive, believe me. He is alive. Harlan, would you like to say hi to everybody? Do you know everybody, Harlan? First of all, these ladies are repeats, as you are. Unless you want me to introduce you again, I'd gladly do that.
No, you don't have to do that. I must apologize again for being tardy. I was watching a fairly good Mexican movie. They're so rare. And I
figured you were still on Cinco de Mayo. I knew that. So that's not a problem. But I'm glad to see you here tonight. Do you have any questions? I mean, there was so much material that came your way. Just if you can back up a few minutes, you can maybe come up with at least one question, right?
Well,
because you write a totally different style, and I want to see how this meshes with the two ladies we have here tonight. Believe me, he's not just a pretty face. He writes good. He writes good.
I'm not a career writer. It seems to me like Rachel is a career writer, and Kate as well. And so I can see how they would want to have beta readers. I don't want to have beta readers. I do everything myself. I had an offer to be a beta reader for me, and the guy's a rabid reader, and I may or I may not take him up on my next book. But for the most part, as I said, I'm not a career writer, and I'm not hell-bent on success as some people are. I just write books. I put them up, I write them, I put them up. The territory you've covered so far, Rachel and Kate are very well versed on all of this, and I'm enjoying listening far more than I am asking any questions.
Okay.
So for those who have not been familiar with Harlan all along, Harlan comes on our show to counteract whatever anyone else says, I think. No, Harlan has his own method of doing things, and for the most part, Harlan writes for Harlan, and he posts his books. But we're going to assume for the, this show especially, that the majority of the people out there who are going to take the time to write it and to publish it, they're doing it for, for a want of, if not financial gain, but of at least recognition. They want people to read it and find it. And in order to do that, I can't say that. I mean, you can advertise the heck out of something, but if it's no good, then what purpose is it serving? So I think that that's sort of the point of the beta reader. They're like one more step to make sure that you're putting out something that people are going to want to read or going to enjoy reading. Is that sort of how you look at it, Rachel?
I do, and I think that sometimes when we're only sitting in our office and talking to ourselves, right? We tend to we're too close to it. It's just impossible for us to be objective, I think, about our own work. I have found that working with my editor is a very collaborative process. She'll say, she's younger than I am. I just turned 50 actually, and she's in her 30s, and I'll have some references and things that she'll be like, what the heck does this mean? I made a Popeye reference. She had no idea what I was talking about. But, I fought for that because I felt like it needed to stay in there. And so for me, I think it's important, if for no other reason, to have at least an editor or a professional editor take a look at it. Now, there's tiers of editing as well. She's a structural and content editor. I didn't know anything about this, I have to tell you. I started writing when I was 10, but I was published for the first time in 2011. So it's not like, yes, I want to make this my career, but at this point it doesn't bring in enough for me to do nothing but that. But it's enough for me to pay professionals because I feel that they make my work better, even though it's still me and my writing. It's almost like working with an editor as somebody who is like your pre-beta reader, but they're professional and this is what they do for a living. So I think you get to that point. You don't have to have beta readers, but I love doing it. It's like, basically, I have a marketing background. I was in the pharmaceutical industry for 15 years in sales and marketing. So I kind of see beta reading as like market research. I get a really good idea of what people are thinking, what's not working, what is working. I don't have to change a thing. I mean, I got a lot of feedback on Broken Pieces. Not a lot, but I would say out of the 20 or 25 people I sent it to, maybe 3 said it was disjointed and I was confused by your structure. And I was like, okay, awesome, that's exactly what I wanted. But some people are very frustrated by that. Even, I just got a 1-star review the other day and it said, the writing was excellent, but I didn't like the structure, so they gave it a 1-star. So, but I thanked her for the review. I was like, yes, that's what I wanted. So I think you have to at least put your work out there, I think, before it's out there, to get that kind of feedback and then make a decision. Okay, should I go back? I mean, this is something Jessica and I did. I said, is it going to be too confusing for people to go from essay to poem to essay to poem? And she said, no, we're going to stick with it. I'm comfortable with it. Are you comfortable with it? I said, yeah, let's go for it, and that's what we did. But we did get that feedback prior to, so I think for a lot of authors, if there's some major gaping holes or major structural issues, that's when you can really make those changes and get feedback and get market research. If you don't care about that stuff and you just want to keep putting out books, then don't bother. I mean, it really is, like Kate was saying, it's really a personal preference. We all write for different reasons. I'm not expecting to become a millionaire, but, be nice to pay my rent with it, or pay Kate.
No, but actually, you're bringing up a good point, though. I mean, when you're working with beta readers, there's going to be times when the feedback you get back is sort of detrimental to everything you've done. I mean, it sort of overrides everything you've done. When do you make the decision that, okay, this is, maybe 2 or 3 people have said this, and it's something that I should address, or how do you make that decision as to whether to stick with it or to, follow the advice?
Again, that's very individual and subjective. For me, I think that I had a vision. I think any author will tell you they have a vision going into the book. It may change completely by the time it's gone through editing and all that, but at least I knew what I wanted to get across to people. And when Jessica, actually, I'll give her, it's Jessica Swift Eldridge is her name, and it's Swift Inc. editorial. And when she said to me, I think, because one thing I always sort of struggle with as a nonfiction writer is what order to put things in. And so I just sort of put them all together, and she kind of left them that way. And she said, I really like this structure because what you felt is very frustrating and difficult. And so maybe if people, we're sort of spoon-fed things as adults. Everything seems to go in chronological order and from A to B to C. So we decided at that point to go from A to D to Y and just deal with it. I did get that feedback, but I trusted my vision, and I have gotten some negative reviews because of it, but for the most part, I've won 7 awards. I'm selling, anywhere from 10 to 20 books a day. I'm okay with it, because it's my book and my name goes on it. I certainly could have at that point, when the beta readers got back to me, said, okay, I'm going to change it. But I felt like that would have been cheating my original vision and how, Jessica saw it as well. And so we decided, no, we're not going to change anything. I think that was really individual. So I can't say there's one way to go or another, but I think everyone's going to get to a point as an artist where you have to decide, does it mean more to me this way or that way, or is commercially it's better this way or that way? And you have to go with your gut.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think sort of what you're saying then is that if it's something that goes against the underlying principle of the book and the reason why you were writing it, then why make that change? You're basically selling yourself out at that point. So I think that most authors would feel the same way. Kate, what would you tell an author you were working with at that point?
Yeah, so when it comes to working with beta readers or editors, there are some things that, if you have 3 people that are telling you, this is a plot hole, you need to fix it, then it's probably time for you to look at it. But it also, there are some things like Rachel was talking about where that was the core of what she was writing, and those are things you're not going to change. Some people get it, some people won't. I think there is also, too, a difference between, Rachel writes nonfiction. Fiction has, there are differences in that writing style. But definitely, when you have a couple people that are looking at, this story, plot event that happens and saying this doesn't make sense, it probably is time for you to give it another look. And the same thing with an editor. I love hearing, authors talk about this because they'll say, I'll go through, and even if the way that they've given me to fix it isn't what I want to do, it still helps me see where there are things that I can go back and make better, even if I do it differently. So that's, it is really kind of, there are some things that you will not change, period. Beth Revis had a great talk about the way that she ended her book, and her editor said, no, you should end it this way and not that way, and she refused because that was her vision for the book. And there are moments where you really do have to stick up for yourself and what you're writing for, but there are other things where it's just, something that you overlooked, or it makes sense to you in your head. So, I mean, I don't write books, but I write blog posts, and I'm always throwing them at my friends or my mother and being like, does this make sense to you? Because when I write it, it makes sense to me in my brain, but it might not make sense to someone else. And I need to be sure that it does, because the whole point of writing that blog post is to help other people. And if they don't get it, then it's useless. So I find that going through the process of critique partners and beta readers is about making the best product possible. So more than, getting those good sales or the recognition, it's just about, being proud of what you put out and making sure it's the best thing that you can do.
Excellent. So, Kate, actually, we are 5 minutes from the end of the show, and I think there's probably a gazillion more questions that could be asked. But we usually try to give everyone a couple minutes to sort of talk about what they're doing now, reach out in any way that you want to, or to add anything to the topic that we didn't touch on that you think needs to be. So on my screen, you're the first, so I'm going to go to you first and let you, say your piece.
Yeah, well, I think for this topic, I pretty much covered everything. If you are looking for beta readers, every week I have a Twitter chat called K8 Chat, so Kate Chat, and I say if someone is looking for a beta reader or they are a beta reader, they can put out, like a call at the end of the chat to look for them. We're going to be celebrating our 1-year anniversary this week, so it should be a lot of fun. Telling everyone to bring party hats. If they take a picture of the party hat, I'm going to enter them in to win a book. So it should be crazy and fun. I have my crazy Christmas party hat, and I'm really looking forward to it. You can find all the information about Kate Chat or the resources to look up book bloggers on katetilton.com.
Excellent. Excellent. Congratulations, by the way. That's fabulous.
Thanks.
Harlan, it's your turn. Would you like to add anything, since you didn't get in there very much?
I have something I'm wondering about, and a question I'd like to ask you, Darcie.
Okay.
When a beta reader comes back to you with their final opinion, how can you determine what they say as being a fact or as opinion? And the question I have for Darcie is, she's mentioned a couple of times that my writing style is completely different. And I'm wondering if you could speak eloquently to that.
No pressure at all. First of all, let me clarify. I really like Harlan's book, and I will speak to the fact that others should read it. I read his book, Robin of Tudor Gables, a little while ago now, and I reviewed it. I think that probably in the same way that some people would say Rachel writes very differently because of her structure, I think Harlan writes differently in that it's more philosophical. Maybe that's a good way of stating it. You stretch beyond stating what's happening and what the people are saying, and you get more into how they feel, and so you're sort of in people's head more than an average writer would be. So that's what I meant by that. I think it's sort of like what we were talking about before. I'm a really bad one to speak about beta reading. I have written for clients, and the majority have chosen beta readers that were, family members or friends, and I don't personally think that that's always the best way to go, but that was their choice. But I will say, if it were me and it was someone reading my book and they were giving me feedback, I would consider anything grammatical or structure, or like you were talking about, a hole in the story. If you're seeing those things over and over again, then you can kind of take it as an issue. Not necessarily fact, but something that needs to be addressed. But opinion. That's my opinion. I don't know that others would read Harlan's story the same way, but that's how I read it. Is that it was very inside the head. There were parts that made me really think, almost to the point where I'm backtracking a little bit and then reading ahead to see if I'm really grasping what they're thinking and speaking at the same time. But I don't think that's a bad thing. If it makes you think, that's a good thing, right? So that being said, does that answer your question, Harlan?
Yes, I would like to know from both Kate, if we have time, and Rachel about the fact and fiction part. If someone tells you this particular part of the story doesn't work, say a scene fails, can you rely on what they're telling you about that as fact, or can you rely on it as an opinion? If they don't think the scene works, but you do,
who wins?
Yeah, what do you do?
Okay. Well, this is also one of the reasons why I think it's good to have more than one beta reader. If one person points it out and you think it's fine, then it probably is. If, all your beta readers are saying this does not work, then it probably really doesn't, and you really should reconsider. It is a beta reader, it's going to be their opinion of what works or what doesn't work. Whenever you read a book, it's going to be your opinion of the book. There is no real fact. It's all opinion. Unless they're telling you, like, this scientific fact is not right, and they have a degree in it, and they, show you in the textbooks where it's not right, it's all going to be their opinion. And that happens if you work with beta reader, editor, critique partner. And it's a process of kind of learning how to work with other people on your work. But it's also one of the reasons why I think you really should work with more than one critique partner. You should work with more than one beta reader, because you can tell kind of what really is an issue and what really isn't. And I've had that. When I've beta read books for people, they've taken some of my advice and they haven't taken others. And that's, the author is one with the final say, as it should be. So does that help?
Yes.
Rachel,
Okay.
did you want to add anything to that? And as you're adding, do you want to tell people what you're up to nowadays and where they can find you and all that stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Kate. I also think that, it's important to have, an editor or at least a trusted person that is somewhat professional with regard to writing, who you can bounce ideas off of and say, hey, I think this, plot point or scene is great. It's the best thing I've ever written, best thing since sliced bread. And we got this feedback, and what do you think? And then they can say, well, maybe you could change this or that. But ultimately, you're the writer, your name goes on the book. So you really have to decide for yourself what direction to go. I think that as authors, it's more of a collaborative process than we think it is, even though we're sitting alone, like I said, in our office talking to ourselves. The work does work its way out there, your beta readers will see it, your editor, your proofreader. I have my mom read everything, which was a little interesting considering I was talking about sex in the last book. But, my dad was great about it. He's like, well, how do you think you got here? So we got over that hump easily. But I think a lot of people are afraid to show people what they're writing, and that's really what I think the whole point is to get that work out there and to own it. At some point you have to say, no, I disagree, the scene works, I'm leaving it in, but know that you may receive criticism about that. And that's just sort of the way it goes. With regard to what I'm doing, I'm still Rachel in the OC, even though I moved up to Northern California. I'm no longer in Orange County, but the name stuck. And I'm here and loving it. And I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. I'm also Bad Redhead Media. So you can find me either place. I'm writing my next social media for authors book, which should hopefully be out in about 2 months through Book Trope. And then I'm writing Broken Places, and that should be out hopefully in the fall is what we're looking at for that. And then once those two are done, I have a few other things that I'm thinking about, but I'm not going to share right now.
Your brain never stops, does it?
No, it doesn't.
All right, Rudi, would you like to add anything? Say your final comments.
You were almost speechless there for a moment.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost always speechless.
I've listened to all this tonight, and it's fantastic. And again, I made a mistake. I didn't use a beta reader. I didn't get a peer review. Well, actually, one thing about I was discouraged from getting a peer review, and to me, those two words actually mean people of my peer, people that are like me. And I was totally discouraged from letting them ever seeing it till they put their money down. And to me, that just it didn't make sense. I got some bad advice, didn't I? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, anyhow, the other thing, and actually it was amazing when I wrote it down earlier because it came into my mind. It turns out that Kate kind of touched on that a little bit in her way. Can you write where you're writing above your readers? And your readers in this case are not necessarily fans of yours, but just in general. It's your first book. You publish your first book, and you are so far out there that no matter who reads it, is going to understand it. And I was sitting here trying to find the title of the book that I was referring to. In my profession, there's been 3 books written about what we did. And the first one that came out was published under a disguised topic. Okay, so it was very general. People started to pick it up, and once they started reading it, and reading that what they were, the cover didn't match the inside, But boy, was the inside interesting. The government looked at it and said, that's got to be pulled. We can't have that no longer. So it became an underground book. Now, in my case, my cover does reveal somewhat of the same story, but I went to the government and had them edit it, basically, for me. You can't use this word, you can't use that. There's a third book out there that was published, and actually it was published for a long time. It sold well, but unless you were, unless you were a Snowden who worked at the NSA, you wouldn't understand that book. So here's a book that's written so far above their readers that it's ridiculous. If people bought it because, you know what, if we can figure out what that says, we know what the future holds for us, kind of thing. So, you know, can that happen on a lesser scale?
You know, it's yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rach. You can write above more ways than one. I mean, there are some. I mean, how many people can read Herman Hesse and understand? You know, how many people can read Madame Blavatsky and understand? It's difficult. They're supposed to be novels, or just what's the one about Buddha that Hesse wrote? How many people could understand that? But you'd have to be interested in the Middle East or the Far East and the religious styles of the Far East to begin with, to even be attracted to that book. I would think what Darcie said, my book is above some of the readers because I do get into my characters' heads. I write character-driven stories, and that may not always be appealing to people who want more action and more sex and, you know, more licking and sucking and stuff like that.
I think it's just a matter of understanding who your audience is and ensuring that, you know, if you're going to write this very technical or very advanced book, then understand that there's going to be a smaller portion of the population that can read it. You know, if your goal is to speak to the, you know, common audience, then write it in a way that the common audience can understand.
You know, you need a little boy and everything to write, I think.
I was just going to say, oh God, sorry, I keep stepping on you guys.
No, Rachel, go ahead.
I didn't mean to. The thing that I think that as any writer of any kind of work, I think we have to recognize that there are universal truths out there. You know, love, lust, you know, parenting, whatever it is that you're writing about. And you have to write it in a way that you're still true to yourself, but that people will understand what you're talking about, unless you just don't care. And there are writers out there who just don't care. They just put it out there. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying that if you want people to relate to your work in some way, there are certain tropes that you should use or not use, but at least learn about. You know, most stories that we love, you know, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, all those, you know, are classic hero's journey kind of stories. And those, Lord of the Rings, those travel that kind of model without us even maybe realizing that we're doing it. But that's what we're so used to, and that's how stories have been told for literally thousands of years. So I think if you can relate to people in some way, then that's how you're going to find your niche. For example, I write about childhood sexual abuse. I've been able to create a whole community of not just women, men too, who suffered that as children. And I've started a chat on Twitter called Sex Abuse Chat, which is actually coming up here at 6 o'clock on Tuesday nights. That's my niche. I didn't ever want for that to happen, but I've been able to utilize that in a way that I'm able to inspire other people to come forward and tell their stories and things like that. So I think that you have to know going into it, what are you trying to accomplish? What will they get by reading my book or your book or her book? And if you're very clear and honest in your objectives, then that comes out in your writing.
Excellent. Well stated. Kate, did you want to say something too on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Darcie, you had a really good statement about that. I really don't think you can write above your readers because they're probably not your readers if they don't understand. And, you know, it really depends on what you're writing the book for. You know, if you're writing the book to tell your story, you want people to read it, then you need to write it for that audience. If you're writing, you know, say you're writing a self-help book, you need to write it so that it will actually help people. If you're writing it just because you need to write it and get it out, it might not be something that other people will understand, but that might not be the point of writing the book. It might be just for you. I actually had an author who wrote a book, but the first, you know, like 6 pages of that book were not published. They were written for her, and that's something that her and her editor both agreed on. You know, there weren't for other people to see. So really, whenever you go into writing, it is a matter of, you know, first of all, figuring out what your goals are with the writing, and then doing the research to make sure you get to that audience. But when you get into, like, you know, super technical books, it might be that your audience is people that have experienced the same thing, or it might be you just want to have, you know, a collection of everything that you know about that topic, and it's not for the general audience.
And then at that point, I would say you need to take a close look at who you're having as your beta reader, and that's sort of why I was asking if you screened, Rachel, because I think there's certainly genres that can kind of fit anywhere, but then there's those ones that need a specific beta reader. If you're shooting for a certain audience, then you want to find somebody that's in that audience to review the book.
It also depends, well, I think it depends on what your goal is with having the beta reader. If it's for them to write reviews at some point, then you want to make sure that they're going to connect with the type of work that you're offering them. So if, you know, I'm offering them nonfiction poetry and they only ever read YA paranormal, that's probably not the best person for me, because most likely they're just not that interested in what I'm going to have to say, because they're more into fiction and fantasy. So, you know, I think there is at least some type of screening that you have to do. And with my book, I had to say, you know, there are some very difficult situations that, you know, if you have this kind of a history of yourself, could be a trigger for you. So this may not be the book for you to beta read. I mean, I think you have to be really upfront with people, just like you're going to be, you know, that's on my Amazon page and everything, that it's, you know, 18 plus, because I don't want some 13-year-old kid reading my book when there's some inappropriate things in there. So I think it's no different in finding your beta readers.
Right, exactly. I agree. So we've gone over tonight, which is absolutely fine and always welcomed. But I am going to, Rudi, if you're all set, I will be ending the show here in a few minutes. I do want to apologize to Crystal. She was on the show last week, and she was the one that I could not remember at the beginning of the show, and I sincerely apologize. Not for, you know, lack of appreciating your attendance or anything like that. It's just my brain shorted. So with that said, I appreciate you guys being here tonight, and I'm really glad that you're both willing to participate, because you have a lot of information to share. As we find every time we have you on the show, there's always a zillion questions that we could ask afterwards. So that's wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And with that, guys, we're going to end the show. Tune back in next week, Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. See you then.
Good night.
Bye.